Proverbs together, it's important to remember that these sayings, what it looks like to build a good life, sits in a larger story, sits in a larger narrative that helps us build a good life with God for others. It's been very interesting to reflect and read Proverbs with so many of you together, whether that's sharing texts or conversations. In fact, this week, Ruth and I were reflecting together on reading Proverbs, both as a family and individually, and she was reading it in the Message translation or paraphrase, and I was reading it my own. And, it's funny because it was almost as if she was like, oh, that was like why maybe my parents had said something a certain way. Or for me, as I just get back from a funeral with my grandpa and processing all the legacy of faith and what that meant to live well and pass on faith for the next generation and how that all looks as I go through my own grieving process, it's been very interesting to think and to read Proverbs about how to live well. And if I could say this, it really for my own story and what I would invite you to is as we continue to do this together, and again, it's not too late to jump in, Proverbs is really God's own invitation to learn wisdom from previous generations. Let me just say it this way. We need each other. And it's important to know that as we share our experience and share our stories, that has an effect on us. And then as we see how God's wisdom is woven into the world, whether we come maybe from that more skeptical or hesitant, like this seems too good to be true, it's helpful to see how a story can simply unfold. And so you'll have to forgive me a little bit as I go through my own grieving process and I stand up here to speak because I can't help but think of, again, that funeral that I had just come from with my grandfather and how he turned basically a non-tillable sheep farm into 150 acres of plowable land and how that farm was passed on from him to now the kids now that he's passed and eventually might be passed on to the grandkids. And what was interesting is while he worked really, really hard, while he was an avid, gregarious salesman, as it was said time and time again, the interesting facet was that there were two kind of claims that no matter who shared the stories, who shared the memories, the hard life that he lived, and this may be more of an aside again as I kind of process my own grief, but his own father never told him that he loved him until he was 70 years old himself. And so you have a hardened man who was ultimately transformed by the love of Jesus. And what was so powerful is as he grew with Jesus, he put a lot of these sayings that I have now come to read again and again, have read before, but I kind of caught back and refreshed to see him put those into practice in his life. And so as family and friends gathered, they would talk about the way in which he lived. And so then as I process Proverbs, as I think about what I aspire to do as a husband and as a father, and really as a pastor, as a community member, I hope to live a legacy, to leave a legacy, to build a good life with God for others. And to live in such a way that it's attractional in the sense of that they go, why did you make this decision? And I can't point back to my story or to my experience or because someone told me some good advice, but because I'm tapping into the wisdom passed down from generations through the word of the Lord and through the fear of the Lord. And so just to remind us that God has woven wisdom into the world that you can access. So whether you're some skeptic or whether you're a believer at all or you're new to your faith journey or you're kind of some seasoned old vet, it's kind of refreshing to come back to the simplicity of some of these proverbs and reminding ourselves that they are situational when we get to the little couplets and say, when and where do these apply, but ultimately can be helpful. And so what I want to do with the rest of our time this morning is, as we have reached chapter 11 as the video said, it's all these couplets of how these things together, is really just pick out a few and see if we can find a theme together. And so starting in Proverbs chapter 11, verse 1, it says, dishonest scales are detestable to the Lord, but an accurate weight is his delight. Proverbs names several significant spiritual dangers that wealth brings as we work through the book together. But the first, I think, is this: money has the power to corrupt your integrity. You might be a person of honesty and character, but in the presence of a lot of money, if you had more, it's remarkable how many people will make compromises. In ancient times, the seller might label 1 pound of weight as 2 pounds and place it on the scale and lead a buyer to pay more for grain than he should. Dishonest scales refer to dishonest business practices. And Jesus was pretty adamant that religious leaders, men who should have been moral examples, he was angry at them. He denounced them for succumbing to the power of money by twisting the law to increase their profits. I think today, as we simply reflect on this proverb, the Lord detests dishonest scales, but accurate weights find favor with him. There's all kinds of ways to hide from either customers or investors the information that they ought to have, without which you can take advantage of them and exploit them. Money has never had so many ways to tempt you. Don't be naive about its power. Wealth gained by fraud will never truly satisfy, because you find yourself looking over your shoulder. Who will find out? And if they find out, what will be the consequence be? So it's important to think about how we interact with our lives. Are we tipping the scales constantly in our favor? Are we maneuvering things to always have an advantage? Proverbs 11:2. When pride comes, disgrace follows, but with humility comes wisdom. So not only do we talk about wealth and naming significant spiritual dangers, but we can also think about the significant spiritual dangers that pride brings. One of the outcomes of pride is an inability to gain new insight because you stop being curious. Pride says, I have all the information I need, I kind of know it all, and I can rely sometimes on our own experience, our own story, our own training, so much so that we stop asking questions, that we stop listening, that we stop exploring. And as I reflect even on this journey of Proverbs, as I mentioned with Ruth and I a little bit, it's like sometimes I was even in a conversation with someone this week who is listening to it instead of like reading it. As they go on walks in the morning, they're like, man, you think you had read it once and you've kind of heard it all, but sometimes you realize how much that you forget. And so sometimes it's like, sweet, I checked the box, I read it, I've moved on, but it can be important to learn and come back with a posture of humility to learn, to be curious. And often it can feel good to be the smartest person in the room or be the person with the most influence, whether that's based on your life experience or your acumen. What happens when pride gets a hold of you is you stop really being curious, and humility through curiosity keeps new information flowing. It means that you're open to new data points that can influence your decisions. And I think this is especially important as we come to what does it mean to live a good life? What does it look like to live well within the world? And I would say especially not just be curious about, what's the new science out there or what's that new technique for your business practice. But be curious with the word of the Lord. What can this teach me again as I revisit it a second, a third, a 50th time? Proverbs 11:3. The integrity of the upright guides them, but perversity of the treacherous destroys them. Said another way, the integrity of the upright guides them, but the unfaithful are destroyed by their duplicity. Integrity means whole or being one. There's a consistency there, not marked by duplicity, where there's compartmentalization, where there's a fracture there. People of integrity are not one way in one setting and completely different in another. This can prove challenging, right? Because we want to be liked. We want to fit in. We don't want to be inconvenienced or really inconvenience others. Some of us just don't want to create quite a stir. We're looking to better ourselves. And so what happens is we find ourselves in one setting being one kind of person, and then in another setting being another. It's why in our vision at Generations, we say we're everyday people. The goal is to be a consistent person, to have the character and priorities of Jesus be consistent no matter the setting that you're in. It can be very tempting to sound spiritual here on Sunday, to use filler phrases. How are you doing? Oh, better than I deserve, or, blessed. And then what happens is, you get in a conversation during the week and you find yourself where it's like every other word, maybe you're cussing. Maybe you feel like you're constantly negative. And where if you were to merge people in different spheres of your life and they were to say, hey, is this person consistent? They'd be like, who are you talking about? It's different people. It can be ruthless in business during the week and then sounding really spiritual and, I'm trusting God in all things, and those aren't necessarily opposites, but we can see some inconsistency. We could say really maybe conservative sounding things to traditional people, but liberal sounding things to younger adults to appear cool and hip. We could present ourselves in one way online and live as a different person in real life. We constantly have technology to brand ourselves, crafting the image that we want to project. We pad resumes, add facts to bios, falsify academic research, do whatever it takes to sell ourselves. Because we think if we can market, we can position, if we can posture our things just right, then we will have it better in the future than it is now, and in effect are trusting ourselves. But the wise and the upright, Proverbs says, are driven by integrity and consistency of character. They don't have multiple selves, a real self and a host pseudo-self. They have one real self, and it's not hidden. It's on display in every setting and every role. And that can be really challenging and risky. Because at times it feels vulnerable, and in often cases it is. But as we seek integration, as we seek to live with integrity, we ultimately find that the integrity, being whole, serves us better and well more often than not. I think of it like this oftentimes. It's people with integrity, they don't live by the light switch mentality. It's where you walk into a room or into a setting and it's like, oh, time to get on, time to get my game face on, time to smile, to say all these right things. And then it's like you walk out the door and you can flip the light switch off and be like, man, glad that that's over. No, I'm not saying that in all cases and all times you have to bear all your problems to the world or you have to emotionally dump on people. But there's a way of living that when you feel it, when it's like, I just got to put on that happy, smiley face, and then, maybe in reality, you're struggling. And so to really pull this together, we really don't want to live by that light switch mentality. Where based on certain settings, you expect or other people expect different things. And if I'm honest, children are a great barometer because they can often get caught in the crosshairs of parents who have double standards of living. Maybe you even reflect on your own childhood. And again, we know parents are often flawed. They're on their own journey. And we can be gracious to them. But we often know where it's like they let us get away with anything at home, and then as soon as we get out in public, it's like, quit doing that, stop doing that. Why are you asking for that, piece of candy or that cake? And it's like, well, you let me do it at home. Like, why is there a difference? And there's a naivety, there's a childlikeness that can call us out, and I would say often can call us up. And so what we should take that note and start to ask the question, is there an area of my life where I'm living by that light switch? Where I find myself constantly turning on to then turn off later on? Does my spouse or my kids or a coworker go, you say this, but then I see this action in your life? And maybe it's because you feel like there's expectations on you or on, for whatever reason. But the goal, the upright and the wise, seek to be integrated whole rather than live in a compartmentalized life. As we move out from almost an individual setting and start to continue to think of a communal way, Proverbs 11:10 and 11 say this, when the righteous prosper, the city rejoices. When the wicked perish, there are shouts of joy. Through the blessing of the upright, a city is exalted, but by the mouth of the wicked, it is destroyed. Paired together, talking about righteous, the Hebrew word here is really this idea of just or justice. We have seen this term, I think even in the video, it kind of gives this idea that those who believe in God and who disadvantage themselves to advantage those around them. We're told that this group of people, the righteous, prosper, that they grow in numbers, that they thrive economically, that they rise to the top of their respective fields. They're successful in every way. And in response to this, the rest of the city does not resent it or shrug. They rejoice. The word here is describing a shout of triumph when a battle is won. Wouldn't it be nice when you're successful if you didn't feel like you had to apologize? But because your character was consistent and because you're doing things for the betterment of others, that when you're successful, other people are ready and willing to celebrate your success. Man, that's truly exciting and hopeful. That when you do well, others are glad. It means this idea that, as Proverbs defines it, that people in a city are truly living righteously. They will always benefit the good of the whole city. It's the kind of thing that I would say that is attractive in the notion of where people may go, I'm not sure I believe what you believe, but I'm glad you believe what you believe because it's bettering those around us. 11:10 gives us this startling standard. If believers were to simply live life as they should, it would create such a public good that those around them would rejoice in their prosperity and success, even if they don't believe what we believe. And again, generally the case as we seek consistency of character and we live with the wisdom given to us by God. In 11:11, it tells us that believers should be a blessing to the city. How? We can infer from the rest of Proverbs that their relationships would be marked by justice and fair dealing. In business, they would be known to be smart but not ruthless, to be people of high integrity. In civic life, they would be the most generous and philanthropic with their assets. They would be the most concerned with the poor and the immigrants that are lifted out of poverty. Their neighborhoods in which they lived would thrive and be great places to live. It's the kind of thing like where if you were walking around your neighborhood and you see trash, you'd pick it up kind of thing. It's the kind of thing where people are glad to see you pass by and not run and hide when you're coming. It's the kind of people who'd be known as peacemakers, doing everything they could to broker relationships and maintain peace among various communities within groups within the city. It's the kind of things where if communities were attacked, they would never retaliate but respond with forgiveness. And finally, it's the strength of their family would be, and their personal lives would be evident to all. Proverbs 11:12, whoever derides their neighbor has no sense, but the one who has understanding holds their tongue. Proverbs forbids deriding, meaning to belittle or treat as unimportant. The Bible links the impulse to despise or look down on someone to pride. And what is the sin, again, of pride in this notion? It's not taking pride in one's work or possessions. Again, we just talked about, like, if you're doing good work and people are excited, like, that's something to be happy about. That's something to be proud of. But sinful pride isn't taking pleasure in having something. It's only in having more than the next person. It's a comparison. So proud is not really pride of being successful or intelligent or maybe good looking or being thinner but you're proud to be richer, smarter, or quote unquote better looking than the people around you. Your sinful pride is you feel better or more pride in comparison to someone else. That's where sinful is, because you're belittling them. You could condemn them. You could judge them as less than. It's having pleasure in being above someone else. The deriding and or despising in your heart. That's the essence of pride. Proverbs 11:24. One person gives freely, yet gains even more. Another withholds unduly, but comes to poverty. The more you scatter your wealth, the more you gather it. And the more you try to keep it for yourself, the more it dissipates. How could that be? Think of a farming. Sorry, stuck in this analogy, kind of in the grief. The more farmers scatter the seed, the more they will reap. And keep in mind, the seed comes back in a better form, as a harvest. If you invest in people's lives, if you try in your business, if you try in your relationships, and you're generous with your time and your energy, and even with your words, eventually it will come back toward you, because ultimately you're sowing seeds that will honestly probably affect someone's heart, someone's posture. Because they may go, there's a possibility, you don't know how much I needed that. Think of how many of you in your stories, you're like, I just wanted someone to believe in me. Or I wish someone extended just that much more. And then maybe that has happened. And you go, I'm so glad that they did. And now, because of what you received, you're a little more open with your own hands and your own generosity and your own things. Your own time, because you knew that someone did that first for you. And honestly, that's the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Is that God moved on behalf of us, for us, first. He loved us first. He saw us in need first and didn't make us earn our way up to him, and didn't say, okay, balance your checkbook, for those of us who may still have those. Make sure you shower every day, though that might help you be good in life. I don't need you to clean yourself up. I don't need you to check all these boxes. I see you in need. You have this guilt. You have this shame. You have this fear. And I'm going to move towards you on behalf of you in the person and work of Jesus, so that you will know you are loved, that your story matters, that you're not alone, that there is a wisdom woven into the world. And that as you hang on to that and access and then simply respond out of that, other people will see that to be true. So what happens is spiritually wise people see their money, their time, their relationships as seed to scatter, as a way to point back towards the eternal truth. That God is a God who loves, and a God who gives, and a God who cares for his children, and wants them to experience that care in all aspects of life. If you feel down and out, God's desire is not that you always feel down and out. If you always feel like an underdog, God wants you to not feel always so much like an underdog. Maybe that served you well for a season. But he wants you to know that you're more than a conqueror. Because he conquered sin and death. And he gives that victory to you. To live not from a place of constant defeat, but to live from a place of victory. This is why I think in Proverbs 11:26 it says, people curse the one who hoards grain, but they pray God's blessing on the one who is willing to sell. 11:26 describes a man who in a time of food scarcity holds onto his grain to raise the price higher. And again, this is not illegal. It's not a bad thing to think about how do I make a profit or make money, because you might be thinking about your family or care. But this man is being cursed because he is acting as if the only bottom line is financial profit. If all we own belongs to God and is giving us to us only as stewards, then there's always another bottom line. And so, with some of these themes coming together, whether you've found yourself living by a light switch mentality, or you're finding yourself constantly fearful, overwhelmed by a temporal bottom line, the call and the hope is that we be a people who, as we put these things into practice, both in personal and business relationships, that we be a people who have an alternative community right here, right now, and build a good life with God for others. Not because we think we're better, because that's the pride in comparison, but because we have first received. And so as we think about this, in ancient Israel, a lot of their personal and business relationships always really overlapped. And ours may not always overlap, but I think that's something worth aspiring to, right? I think what Proverbs starts to teach us is lives that aren't compartmentalized, that are truly integrated, means that together we as a church community will find ways and partnerships and opportunities, as so many of you have and done, to live together, to be together, to serve one another, to be present, to make things overlap and more, because in a world that's so divided, so compartmentalized, so many people where they're one way at home, one way at work, one way when they go to have fun, one way maybe on their phone, that we start to be people who break down those walls of division, break down those walls of compartmentalization, and simply be everyday people who are responding to Jesus, being whole. And so, I think these Proverbs, if I might trace this theme together, are concerned about how we spend and save our currency in both wealth and with our words, with our time and our relationships. In Matthew chapter 7, Jesus echoes this theme. If I can flip to it. Or I should say it's not Matthew 7, it's Matthew 6. It says this: don't collect for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal, but collect for yourselves treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys, where thieves don't break in and steal. For where your treasure is, there your heart will be also. Set for yourselves treasures in heaven. The currency of your life through words and wealth is best spent and saved when viewed through the lens of the cross and the resurrection, what God has done for us through Jesus. And so with your words and your wealth this week, how will you build a good life with God for others? Maybe with your words, you got to write your social media posts on a notepad and wait 24 hours before posting. Maybe you ask God in prayer to give you perspective on how your work fits into the larger well-being of the community. I know sometimes when you're just a number on a line, it can feel very overwhelming and like, where do I fit into all this? Maybe the simple prayer this week is, God, help me step back. Help me see the bigger story of what in the world I'm doing vocationally, or maybe just to pay the bills, how this can be used for your good and for your glory. Maybe you need to refund some money because of an unfair business dealing. And let's just be honest, while we won't always get it right, because there are going to be things in these Proverbs that we even say, you go, yeah, I kind of blew that. I didn't get that right. I'm not sure I want to get it right now. But the reality is as we learn to treasure Jesus more, we will see change in our life. We will see change in the people's lives around us because we're sowing a seed that's not temporary. It's not about some now bottom line, but it's about an eternal bottom line. We'll see the walls of compartmentalization come down and experience integrated lives. And I think that's the hope, and that's how we can build a good world with God for others. And so whether you've read Proverbs, up to this point or not, my encouragement to you is start reading with us. Share it in a text, what you've noticed, what stands out, what you don't like. Sometimes that's just as powerful. And allow God in that confession to work through what it is you need to hear. And watch as a community comes together to simply be everyday people, loving each other, living out his word because of Jesus. Let me pray for us. God, you are good. God, I know sometimes these Proverbs are so challenging. They're not always pleasant to the ears. They're convicting to our hearts. God, but help us take a risk to access the way you've designed the world, to step into that reality. God, help us see opportunities where we can partner with you where you're already at work. Lord, forgive us when we're filled with pride or comparison or hard-heartedness. Thank you for being patient with us. Help us to truly treasure what you would hope to have us treasure. It's in Jesus' name I pray. Amen.